New York is just another deep blue bastion, having an about face when it comes to crime and a lack of punishment. Suddenly they want punishment. As Governor Kathy Hochul sends in the National Guard to subway stations amid a spike in violent crime. Look at this headline. Ironically, the New York Times was among the first to report this development. Suddenly, the governor wants to get some law and order. But remember during the so-called Summer of Love 2020, when Senator Tom Cotton of Arkansas penned an op-ed on request, and he called for the use of the National Guard to bring law and order to the big cities? Well, to say it caused controversy is a major understatement. It sparked a mutiny among Times staffers and resulted in several editors being pushed out of their jobs, fired, rather than defend the expression and the free expression that the author had published, and may I add, was asked to publish. Now, the Times buckled to the pressure and amended the story with an editor's note condemning the piece, reading in part, after publication, this essay met strong criticism from many readers and many Times colleagues, prompting editors to review the piece and the editing process. Based on that review, we have concluded that the essay fell short of our standards and should not have been published. I know, my head's still spinning too. They may not have liked Cotton's opinion then, but now they got to report it as a fact and a remedy. Here to soak in the irony is Senator Tom Cotton of Arkansas himself. Senator, you created such an uproar when you followed up with the request from the New York Times. What are you feeling now that is now the story of the day?
Well, Brian, I find myself in an unusual position. For once, I have to agree with the New York Times. My op-ed didn't meet their standards. It far exceeded their normally low, laughable standards. And you've seen that at work again this week. Kathy Hochul has had to deploy the National Guard and state troopers to keep New York City subways safe. And this time, the New York Times is praising her, saying it should happen. So when they're worried about street crime in their community, they want to send in their troops. But when you had BLM riders and Antifa rampaging through other city streets and committing arson and rioting and looting, then they thought it was a historic crime of epic proportions to even suggest we should use troops to restore order, as has happened in the past, for instance, when George Bush had to do it during the Rodney King riots. But it's not just the New York Times, it's Kathy Hochul and Mayor Eric Adams, and before him, Mayor Bill de Blasio, for letting street crime get this far gone. For many years, New York City was one of the safest big cities in the world because you had a series of strong mayors and police commissioners and an outstanding police force. But Democratic politicians haven't let the police do their job, keep the city safe for innocent civilians, and now it's gotten to the point where they do have to send in the National Guard. That's an indictment of Democrats on crime.
Two things. We have to prove beyond Election Day that Democrats really care about crime, number one. And number two, it's going to take a long time and a lot of apologizing to get the police force back up to strength in these major cities. They've been insulted, beat down. No one wants the job. They got to be convinced that having the badge is something of pride again. And I hope we bring that back. Another area of expertise for you is China. Two things happened this week that I think are significant. In the House, they're moving on banning TikTok if ByteDance, the Chinese-owned company, doesn't sell off 80% of it. If not, they're going to ban it. Of course, there's an organized protest for it. First, this is one half of the China story. Your take.
Yeah, Brian, I commend the House of Representatives for passing unanimously out of committee on a vote of 50-0 a bill to insist that TikTok no longer be controlled by the Chinese communist-controlled ByteDance, forcing ByteDance to sell TikTok to an American company if it's going to continue to operate in America. TikTok is a grave danger to America. First off, it puts your data at risk because it hoovers it all up and sends it back to China. Second, it's a grave danger for our youth. TikTok frequently exposes young women to videos about, say, eating disorders or self-harm, even if they haven't requested it, and young men to obscene sexual videos or violence, and again, even if they haven't requested it. But third, as we saw last week, TikTok can become a source of propaganda. TikTok sent out a message to many of its users urging them to deluge Congress with calls saying, don't pass this bill. Some TikTok users said they couldn't even use the app until they placed that call. That's all about a bill to protect TikTok. Imagine if the Chinese communists insisted that TikTok do that, say, in a conflict over Taiwan or in a trade war with China. That's why TikTok has to be sold. I strongly support the bill in the House of Representatives. I hope they send it to the Senate, and we pass it immediately.
We're just asking 18 to 22-year-olds or 16-year-olds to do what other generations have done. Just sacrifice a little for the good of the country. We're not asking you to go to war. Just delete an app. Also, the other story real quick in the Wall Street Journal, China has got to move to delete America's technology sector from its country. Here's a quote. For American tech companies in China, the writing is on the wall. It's also in a paper, document 79. 2022 it was written. It was a government document. It's a directive. Expand the drive to muscle out U.S. technology firms and delete that's delete America. That is eventually goodbye Dell, goodbye Microsoft, goodbye all the major tech firms. I know it's going to cost money and hurt the stock, but I personally like this. How do you feel, Senator?
Yeah, Brian, I join you in saying good riddance. I wish these companies had never gone into China. I've urged many of them to exit China. They can find ways to make profit elsewhere. We don't need to prop up the Chinese communist economy. But it's not enough just to rely on China to stop using American technology.
Right.
We have to make sure that they're not stealing our technology or
helps.
stealing the technology of our allies. So, for instance, in the growing field of artificial intelligence, we have to ensure, again, that China is not taking advantage of American ingenuity. Or in some cutting-edge fields, like semiconducting microchips, sometimes there's just one or two companies worldwide that make the machines that can manufacture those tools. We have to work with those companies and the countries in which they're located to ensure that as China claims it wants to get off Western technology, it's not also stealing Western technology.
So you, a guest on our show like you that we value and is a great radio host, thinks that you should be the VP. He looked at your background. He said, quote, and I'll just put it up on the screen, and he's the best choice because hard America versus soft America election. There isn't a more hard-nosed elected official in the U.S. than Tom Cotton, not named Trump. Cotton is a realist who relentlessly stays on message and avoids mistakes and takes it right at his political opponents. And he goes on. Have you thought about being asked about number two? Are you being vetted, and how do you feel about that?
Well, Brian, I respect Hugh Hewitt greatly. He's certainly right that Arkansas is the best of hard America, and I try to be a strong, hard voice for hard Arkansans who are patriotic and believe in faith, family, and freedom. That said, President Trump will make his own choices about the vice president and ultimately about cabinet. My focus for this next 9-month period outside of my work in the Senate will be making sure President Trump wins his election, that we win a majority back in the Senate, and that we hold the majority in the House so we can deliver real change for the American people starting next year. Right.
You decided not to run this year because your kid's a little young, but maybe if you kept him in Washington, it might be okay. Senator, always great to do you. Thanks for the quality time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Brian.